Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, John Rees. Armed UK drones now being used in attacks in Afghanistan will be redeployed to other theatres when the troops come home this year. That's what UN Special Rapporteur on Drones Ben Emmerson has found in his latest report. The Ministry of Defence has issued a statement saying that it currently has no plans to redeploy the pilotless strike aircraft. But Defence Secretary Philip Hammond, on a recent visit to RAF Waddington, the facility from which UK drones are controlled, asked if UK drones would be used in the Yemen, said, "We have to pursue the terrorists wherever they take themselves. So, will they or won't they be redeployed? And in any case, should they be used at all? US and UK drones have killed 3,000 people under President Obama, 500 of them civilians. And Ben Emmerson's UN report reverses previous findings and shows that more civilians die from drone use than from aircraft with pilots." Joining me to discuss the politics and ethics of drone use are Alice K. Ross, head of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism's Covert Drone War Project, Mohammed Amin, Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Muslim Forum, and James I. Rogers, who's Professor at the Centre for Security Studies in the University of Hull. But first, let's take a look at this report.
The issue of the use of drones in international warfare is always simmering below the political agenda. The latest report by Ben Emmerson QC, UN Rapporteur monitoring counter-terrorist operations by unmanned aircraft, has suggested that the Ministry of Defence is likely to redeploy British Predator drones in Africa and the Middle East, rather than returning them back to the UK. Speaking to The Guardian, Emmerson said, "My understanding is that the plan is to deploy them to parts of Africa and the Middle East where they can be used for surveillance, over a wide range of territory where one party is a jihadist group. The way the matter has been explained to me by senior sources close to the MOD, the current plan for the drones is Africa and the Middle East, where they can be quickly deployed into situations of tension. I would be surprised if they were not thinking about returnees from Syria so they can monitor the axis of jihadist violence." However, a press release from the MOD rebuffed Emmerson's suggestion. The UK only uses unmanned air systems in support of operations in Afghanistan or to improve the situational awareness of Royal Navy's ships at sea. Any UK assets flown in other countries have been unarmed and part of either previous operations, in the case of Iraq, or training activities. The UK currently has no plans to redeploy its unmanned air systems after Afghanistan. That contradicts an earlier suggestion by Defence Secretary Philip Hammond that drones could be deployed in the Arab Gulf. When asked by a journalist in December whether drones could be deployed to fight al-Qaeda in Yemen, Hammond replied, "We have to pursue the terrorists wherever they take themselves. Wherever there's an ungoverned space, there's a risk." The use of drones has been increasingly controversial over the past few years. While their supporters claim they are a vital tool in the war on terror, they are accused of infringing the sovereignty of allied states and causing an alarmingly high number of civilian deaths. In Pakistan, the new government headed by Nawaz Sharif has called for an end to drone strikes, which have already been declining in light of talks with the Taliban in the country. But in Afghanistan and Yemen, they have been increasing. According to the UN, drone strikes accounted for 40% of civilian fatalities inflicted by aerial attacks in Afghanistan in 2013. Emmerson's latest report calls for states to do more to agree a set of international rules on the use of drones, as well as being more transparent about their usage. But with a consensus yet to be reached, in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, Palestine, and other parts of the world, many people will for the time being continue to look to the skies with apprehension. Alex MacDonald, Islam Channel.
Okay, so Alice, just tell us what the Emmerson report said in short.
Well, this was the second report of a year-long investigation that Ben Emmerson, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on Counter-Terrorism, has undertaken into the use of drones by the UK, by the US and Israel, so all three countries that currently operate armed drones. And he looked at armed drones both on and off the official, the internationally recognised battlefield. In his first report...
Just let me stop you there. So just unravel that distinction, well, yes. On and off.
And this is a very important distinction. So drones are currently used, they were used in the Iraq conflicts, they were used in Afghanistan, they were used in Libya. Yes, they've been acknowledged in all of those conflicts. These are internationally recognised, if you like, official conflict zones where they fall clearly into the rubric of international humanitarian law. You know, these are official conflict zones where the laws of war apply, and drones in those contexts have been used alongside all sorts of other military equipment.
So what's the other bit then?
What's the other bit? Now, the US, since 2002, the US has also launched several hundred drone strikes in Pakistan, in Yemen, in Somalia, in countries where there is not that internationally defined state of war. I mean, in many of these countries, the security situation is often extremely poor. There are a number of conditions which lead the US to argue that actually these are legal strikes, but they are not internationally recognised armed conflicts. Okay. So Emerson's report, in his first report, he looked at all of the legal context, if you like, of these drone strikes, and he ended up laying out a sort of what he said was a legal obligation that states which were carrying out drone strikes have to be transparent and to publish its own response to claims of civilian casualties. In the second report, what he's done is he's done a sort of overview, a gathering together of what information is available on 30 separate drone strikes, where he says that there is credible evidence of civilian casualties and that he says demand a response.
Okay. Mohammed, what do you make of this, let's say, difference of interpretation between the MOD and the Defence Secretary? Who's got it wrong, Sir Humphrey or the Minister?
I've not been following that story, so I can't actually comment. But coming back to drone strikes themselves and the loss of innocent life, I think we're all agreed that it's vitally important that if drones are going to be used, they actually not kill innocent people and actually kill the terrorists that are the targets of the drones. And I don't know how reliable is the evidence that the UN has actually been looking at. But clearly, we should all be able to agree that wherever possible, it's vital that we actually don't kill innocent people.
What do you reckon about that then, Alice? How reliable is the UN's material? I mean, it doesn't sound like anybody else has got any more reliable figures. Well,
indeed. I mean, one of the problems with looking at drone strikes, and I run a team that's been studying drone strikes now for over 2 years, and we've encountered enormous difficulty in coming to any kind of an estimate of how many people are being killed overall, and even of who they are, whether they are civilians or whether they are alleged militants. This is the phrase that we hear all the time, which has no sort of accepted legal meaning, so it's quite a dangerous term. But so establishing who has been killed is extremely difficult in drone strikes. What Emerson has done is an exercise which is, in some senses, similar to work that we've done. He's surveyed all of the available sources. I mean, the Bureau's also conducted field investigations on several occasions. But Emerson has sort of gathered together really what's in the public domain. But his point is not to uncover new facts himself. I believe that the point of the report is really to say to the US, to say to the countries that are accused of causing civilian casualties, your move. It is you have a legal obligation to explain what has happened here. You have a legal obligation to investigate, and then you have a legal obligation to make those findings public. Okay. And I think that's potentially really important.
Am I right in
let me just a moment. Just let me bring James in. James, welcome to the programme. I'm sorry, I think I awarded you a professorship, which you haven't yet obtained yet, but I'm sure you will.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No, I'm sure you'll get there. But as a contribution towards that, what do you reckon this is going to happen here? Is Philip Hammond right that they're going to be sent off somewhere else? Is Emerson right they're going to be sent off somewhere else, or are they going to be parked back in Waddington?
Well, the RAF have already confirmed in May 2013 that they will be redeployed outside of the UK. So, in terms of Emerson report,
well, that's interesting, James. Just let me stop you there. Well, it's new to the MOD because they sent us a statement today saying that no decision's been made on this. So, did they not get the memo?
Well, I'm sure they got the memo, but in terms of official line, confirmation seems to have already been in the press that these will be redeployed, but not in the UK. Okay. The reasons for this are plentiful, but I believe they have more strategic utility if deployed in other theatres of the world, as opposed to being merely sat in a car park in the UK.
But should they? Should they be used? Are they a legitimate and defensible weapon of war? I mean, it's rather like Hilaire Belloc's poem back in the day, isn't it? We have the Maxim gun and they do not.
Well, with new technologies, you always have certain amounts of controversies. However, in regard to warfare, I see drones as not being particularly different as any other weapon. But the way they are used can assign them certain characteristics that make them either immoral or unethical. When we look at targeted killings, which is a highly contentious debate, and I'm not entirely sure myself if it's defensible, then you can say these are unethical or immoral weapons. However,
because they're essentially extrajudicial assassination when they're targeted, yes?
That could be one take that you could have, yes. However, if you can use, just as with any weapon, can be used immorally or unethically, with drones you can use them in a somewhat virtuous manner as well. And with Emerson's recommendations for transparency and to oblige to legal norms, you hope that in the future that's the path that the use of drones will take.
OK, well, let's unpack that a bit. Mohammed Amin, targeted killings. I mean, these are specific individuals who are said to have committed particular crimes, but there's no judicial process and they're simply assassinated. I mean, that surely should be something which is ruled out.
Oh, that depends. Let's take a concrete example, bin Laden. Suppose the Americans had been able to track bin Laden to somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, but in a situation where they couldn't actually go and arrest him. Well, let's say he was somewhere in Yemen, where it's actually not easy to put people on the ground.
Let's say he was actually in a house and they knew where it was,
well, if he was in a house,
which was in fact the case.
When he was in a house, they knew where he was. They actually sent Marines, SEALs, to go and get him. But in a situation where it is not feasible to actually send soldiers on the ground, but you know who you're targeting, there are very strong reasons why that person is an enemy of the United States of America, is engaged in military combat against them, I don't have a problem firing missiles at him.
I just want to come back on the idea that it's always clear exactly who the target is and that the evidence against them is always clear. I mean, at the Bureau, we have a project called Naming the Dead, where we're aiming to identify as many of the people killed in drone strikes in Pakistan as we can. So we've identified something like 630 people by name so far, out of a minimum of 2,500 people who've been killed by drones. So we're looking at about 20% of people where there is any kind of indication about who they are, and that is any kind of indication. It could be a little scrap in a media report. But 80% of these people, the vast majority of these people, remain unidentified, in some cases years after they've been killed. For a time, the US also employed a tactic in Pakistan and in some cases in Yemen known as signature strikes, where rather than targeting based on, aiming at specific individuals, the targeting decision was made based on behaviour, based on suspicious modes of behaviour. So this is not always a strategy which is used necessarily for a specific and very clear, articulated military reason.
Well, James, let me put that point to you, because I mean, you said that perhaps that you're in two minds about the targeted individuals, but the signature strikes, well, even if you agreed they were a good idea militarily, they produced an enormous political backlash, didn't they, when they were used in Afghanistan? I mean,
in Pakistan, you've got to first of all you've got to differentiate between the two situations here. I was discussing with the Deputy Governor from Helmand Province just last week, and he was stating to me that in Helmand, and if drones are used in that particular area, the public objection to drones is far less than if you use drones in Pakistan, which leads me to the point of removing drones from Afghanistan.
But let's just focus on the question of the signature strikes, because even in Afghanistan, those did produce a political backlash.
Absolutely. I mean, drones are designed to be proportionate and discriminate in their use. And if you use them within a legal framework, then you can justify their use wherever they are used. However, in war, mistakes happen, and high-profile mistakes happen, and they can tar the weapon itself.
Mohammed, I mean, you were saying earlier that, of course, nobody wants to see the death of civilians, but one of the things about the Emerson report seems to suggest that actually civilian deaths are now higher using drones than they were, and higher than manned aircraft.
Well, let's come back to signature strikes, first of all, because I think the United States has actually stopped using that approach because it was too unreliable. And therefore, ended up killing far too many innocent people as opposed to the people that you're trying to kill. Coming back to the general point in the Emerson report, though, which I actually haven't read, he's working from public domain information, which in many cases is actually highly unreliable. There was a time when...
Hang on a minute. He's operating with the most information that anybody has. Yeah. So to say, that, well, all right, if anybody in the defence establishment has got better information, let's see it.
In the same way, or in the opposite way to 20 years ago, when anybody who ever got arrested in the IRA instantly got promoted. So where there were always super important people if they were IRA people who'd been arrested. What you see, in my view, in Afghanistan and Pakistan is if anybody gets killed, instantly they were really innocent, and that's how the media report it.
But how do you know that? There has been no public estimates, really, particularly when we're looking at covert drones off the battlefield. I mean, that is a campaign defined by its secrecy, so it becomes very difficult. What are you supposed to rely on?
The United States government. The United States government.
Is that an assertion, or do you actually have a case that you know of somebody who was?
No, it's an assertion. But the United States government, which has every incentive to try to get it right, knows how much damage is caused politically by killing innocent people.
We have a responsibility to be clear to the viewers here. You're simply saying, I think this might be the case. But you don't have a single case of somebody who a named individual, who was said to be a terrorist, was a terrorist, and then when they were killed, they were reclassified as an civilian. You don't have that in even one case.
No, I don't.
Okay, so Alice, do you think that the questions of international law, moving on a little bit, for instance, the violation of sovereignty, which seems to be an absolutely critical issue here, has that now become something which is routine with the use of drones, which couldn't conceivably have been the case with manned aircraft?
Is that something which could have been? Yes, I mean, in some senses it is easier because drones are robotic and they're powered from a long way away. The risk of using them is very, very low. You're not risking any personnel whatsoever if your aircraft gets shot down, for example, over enemy territory. The other thing is a slightly sort of abstract and in some senses a slightly false construction, which is that you can say that there are no boots on the ground if you're using a drone. You can say that there is only sort of equipment and machinery in much the same way as there might be satellite equipment, and that does appear to make some level of difference.
Okay, let me just ask James about that. James, are we lowering the bar here? We're actually conducting warfare across the borders of other countries, but it's not being read in the same way that it would be if there were either boots on the ground or manned aircraft used.
Well, in regards to the early days of Yemen or their use in Pakistan, there is no doubt that there's a political backlash from that, and the Emerson report shows that there has been a drawdown of their use there, and I would say highly for political reasons. With Imran Khan's consistent voice against the use of drones, you can see that public rejection of their use is extremely potent. So to remove drones from use in that particular area, what you're doing is you're paving the way for a political settlement to the situations there and hopefully future stability. And this, I hope, will be the way that drones are used in the future. You don't use them without the approval of the nation state, and you use them in a way that you cooperate with them or under a UN mandate.
Okay, well, thanks for that. That brings us to the close of the first half, but we'll be looking in more detail at some of the international repercussions of this in part 2. So come back for part 2 of analysis after the break.